Okay, I'll suggest you to pause and attempt each question. I'll try to make this video as small as possible. Try this one. I hope you would have done this. Now, what is this question? This question is very specific. Unsustainability in production pattern is due to which of the following? Now, they're asking us a reason for something. Now, what is that something? Unsustainability in production pattern. And they have given us 3 statements as reasons, and we have to pick the reasons. Heavy dependence on fossil fuels, that's actually mentioned here. Rely heavily on fossil fuels. Limited availability of resources, that's also mentioned here as the resources are finite. And these are fossil fuels, and they are finite. And that means there's limited availability of them. But expansion of recycling, this statement, is not the reason or cause for what has happened, unsustainability in production. Rather, that is something that will be a solution to the problem, something that will counter the issue. So that is not our statement that we have to pick. So option A is the right answer. As you can see, these 2 things are actually mentioned in the passage. I hope that's clear. Let's move on to the next question. Try this question. This question is the main reason why I waited for months for UPSC to come up with an official answer key. And finally, thank you UPSC for your official answer key for this question paper, especially a question like this. Now, your key is giving us some conviction and courage to discuss a question like this. Thank you. Now, let's look at this question. Developed countries can support developing countries' transition to sustainable human development by, they've given us 3 statements. Statement 1, making clean energy sources available at low cost. Statement 2, providing loans for improving their public transport at nominal interest rates. Statement 3, encouraging them to change their production and consumption patterns. When I read this first, I knew there's an easy elimination here. That's nothing but statement 3. Now that can be easily discarded because developed countries encouraging them to change their production and consumption pattern is totally out of context. It's wild, weird guess. So when I eliminate statement 3, I have to eliminate option C and option D. All right. Now, these 2 statements were debatable, especially this statement. Providing loans for improving their public transport at nominal interest rates may not sound good, may not look like an answer. But look at this word. UPSC is convinced that they need to be picked as an answer because their countries can support their countries. So they are trying out the ways in which their countries can support. Now, towards the end, as you can read, developed countries need to support. So this passage or the author is so much asserting that developed countries need to support. So we can assume or we can take option statement 2 because developed countries can support. It's using the word can support. So statement 2 is taken because of that strong word out there, can support, and the strong assertion by the passage that there's a need to support. And statement 1 is actually an easy pick, no doubt about that. Making clean energy sources available at low cost is actually easily picked from this passage. So I want to specify those areas. Investing in public transport, the high cost. So that's the connect. This article high is the connect. And the high cost, the article is actually talking about making clean energy sources at low cost because of the high cost of availability of clean energy sources mentioned here. So my answer would be option B, 1 and 2. This is easily eliminated. I hope this is. Try doing this question. This passage is a typical example of how we can work on the principle of elimination. What is the question? According to the passage given above, deforestation and denudation will ultimately lead to which of the following? They have given us 3 statements. Out of the 3 statements given, there's 1 statement that can be easily eliminated. Which one is that? Statement 2. Now, why would I eliminate that? In this passage, there's nothing mentioned regarding shortage of land, number 1. And that is not even specific to shortage of land for the common man. There's nothing in this passage that specifies common man. And this passage doesn't talk about land in general. So this is easily eliminated. This passage compares 2 kinds of lands. Number 1, which is rich with its soil, which is rich with its water resources, and that is optimum or conducive for agriculture. And the other kind of land that is taken here is brown earth, bare of vegetation, without any water source. And they've given us some tools in the form of deserts of Rajasthan, Satluj Ganga plains, and the Deccan Plateau as tools to exemplify the other kind of land. And this passage is never about land in general and not about common man. So when statement 2 is eliminated, I can easily eliminate option A, I can easily eliminate option B, I can easily eliminate option D, and I should pick option C as my answer. And when I read my passage again, if that is necessary, I can be reaffirmed that this statement 1 and statement 3 will follow from this passage, from this side. So based on my elimination, option C is my answer. I'm more convinced about eliminating than selecting the right answer. So sometimes this works out in UPSC questions. Question 11. Which one of the following statements best reflects the message of the author of the passage? Again, the keyword message. Looking at the options, option A, we assume that in a democracy, any politician is qualified to administer a state. Now, that is what we should not assume, and that is never a message of this passage. Any politician, that's an extreme word anyway. Option B, politicians should be selected from those trained in administration. Now, that sounds like a message, but let me read further. We need to devise a method of barring incompetence from public office. Now, looking at all these illustrations given by the author in this passage regarding shoemaking, physician, now I feel C is a larger message than option B, but let me read option D. As voters select their administrators, the eligibility of politicians to administer state cannot be questioned. That's never a message. Option A, option D, easy to discard. Now, it's a choice between option B and C. The UPSC official answer key, the right answer is option C and not option B, and rightly so, because option B is about selecting politicians from those already trained. But there's no point in actually selecting from those trained. This actually limiting the scope of the passage. By giving all these many illustrations, it's about we need to be finding something, a method to bear incompetence, something from external. Incompetence should not enter the public office. So this looks more like that message, and rightly so. And as per UPSC official key, option C is the right answer. Okay, read this passage and answer question 12. Later, we'll move on to question 13 and 14. This is one single passage with 3 sub-questions. That's a good news. I hope you would have read this. Now let's look at the question. Question 12. Why is the methodology adopted in India to count the poor debatable? Certainly, the passage mentions the methodology is debatable. Now, we have to pick the exact reason why it is debatable from these options. The exact reason why debatable. Now, looking at option A, there is some confusion regarding what should constitute the poverty line. That's not my answer. It's not about any confusion regarding what should constitute the poverty line. In fact, the passage clearly mentions that it's beyond poverty line. There are certain things that we are not considering that we should be considering. And that is not the reason anyway why it is debatable, option A. Looking at option B, again, that's an elimination. Reading that, there are wide diversities in condition of the rural and urban poor. Rural and urban poor, their condition. And because of that, that is debatable. Now, that's an option because there should be an option. Nothing other than that. No other reason why B is an option there. It's totally out of context and totally not related to the question. Looking at option C, there is no uniform global standard for measuring income poverty. Again, that is not the reason why it is debatable. And it is certainly not because there's a lack of some uniform global standard, some parameter, some yardstick to measure income poverty. The passage clearly mentions there are things beyond that, beyond all that. It's not because of there's a lack of uniform global standard. It is debatable. No, it is debatable because it is based on the proposition of poverty as meager income or buying capacity. Option D is my right answer. Now, it's clearly spread over in this passage, as you can see. It exclusively relies on the notion of poverty as insufficient income or insufficient purchasing power. And regarding poverty of life, the passage clearly mentions it's also in the lack of real opportunity given by social constraints as well as personal circumstances. We can't just depend upon measuring purchasing power capacity. It's beyond all that. And that's why it is debatable. I hope that's clear. Option D is the answer. Okay, let's attempt question 13, which is based on the same passage. Question 13. Again, it's about why. Why is income poverty only one measure of counting the poor? We have to find exactly why so. Why income poverty is only one measure of counting the poor. So we have to be very specific on this why. Option A, it talks of only one kind of deprivation, ignoring all the others. Now that looks like my answer. From what I could understand from this passage, it looks like my answer, but I'm not finalizing now. I'm reading further. Look at option B. Other deprivations in a human life have nothing to do with lack of purchasing power. Now, this is just a statement that sounds very extreme. Other deprivations in a human life have nothing to do with lack of purchasing power. Number one, this is not about whether any other deprivation in human life has got something to do with the lack of purchasing power or not. It is not about that. And number two, it's not about this as being the reason why income poverty is only one measure of counting the poor. So definitely this is not my answer. This is not the reason why, for sure. Option C, income poverty is not a permanent condition. It changes from time to time. Good philosophy. I like that, but not an option, which is the answer to this particular question. Option D, income poverty restricts human choices only at a point of time. Now, where did that come from? The word restricting is here. That is for sure. But that doesn't mean that you can just use the word restrict and create an option and tell that that's the right answer. Now, that has got nothing to do with this particular question. So that's not my answer. This is not my answer. This is not my answer. Yes, I was actually right. A is the answer. It talks of only one kind of deprivation, ignoring all the others. As it's very clearly mentioned, if poverty is ultimately about deprivations affecting human well-being, then income poverty is also only one aspect of it. Then the passage clearly says, but also in the lack of real opportunity given by social constraints as well as personal circumstances. So this is quite an easy question, no difficulty. Just stick with option A. Let's go to the next question. This question 14. What does the author mean by poverty of a life? This question is very specific on what the author means by poverty of a life. That's mentioned at this part of the passage. To get to know what the author really means by poverty of a life, we have to go to that part or portion of the passage where author really mentions poverty of a life. We need to imply or infer from that part to get to know what the author really means. So we have to go to that part. Now I went to that part, read that again, and coming back to my options. All deprivations in a human life which stem not only from lack of income, but lack of real opportunities. Now that sounds like my option, no doubt. But then I'm a bit worried about this all, which looks very extreme. But it's very clear that it's not just about solely income, it's also about lack of real opportunities, of lack of real choices. So the context is clear, but this is the worrying word here, all. But let me read further. Impoverished state of poor people in rural and urban areas. Again, this is an option which is set by the author for the sake of an option. That's it. Impoverished state of poor people in rural and urban area. That is not what the author means by poverty of a life. That's beyond the scope of the passage. Out of context, option B. Option C is again out of context. Missed opportunities in diverse personal circumstances. There is a mention regarding personal circumstances, but that is in another context that is not at least regarding the meaning of poverty of a life. Option D, material as well as non-material deprivations in a human life which restrict human choices permanently. Again, the word restriction is used, but that is another context. That's not the context where the author would mean this is the meaning of poverty of life. No, that is not the meaning of poverty of life. Option D. I have a small reservation with this word all, but it's okay since B, C, D are easy eliminations. Option A is my answer. At least that is a part of the context and poverty of life. Soon after that, what is mentioned is this option is what is mentioned soon after poverty of life. So we can find it here. I hope that's clear. Thank you. Question 21, 22, and 23. These are 3 sub-questions of a single passage. Is another good news. Question 21. Please pause and attempt. Okay. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. The key word here is assumption. Assumption is something that you will imply from the passage. It need not be directly mentioned in the passage, but it's something that you can imply from the passage. But one thing's for sure, it need to be based on the passage, not from something that you have assumed or presumed outside. All right. Statement 1. Development of agricultural technology is confined to developed countries. Confined to developed countries. The passage never says it is confined. In fact, it is moving. Now, if you can read this, application of technology can help overcome these problems. Agricultural technology is changing fast. Much of this change is brought about by affluent farmers in the West Americas. Much of this change. So the passage is telling it is not confined, but the greater portion of the change is happening in this area, West Americas. But that will never mean that it is confined to only that place. So this is not something that you can assume from the passage. Statement 2. Agricultural technology is not adapted in developing countries. It's wrong. This is not something that you can assume because the passage says techniques developed in the West are being adapted. But the passage will tell that how can you assume 2? So the option would be D, neither 1 nor 2. Read this passage to answer question number 22. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. The key word used here is assumption. In Csat comprehension, we need to know something about the keyword assumption. Assumption is one of the trickiest keywords in Csat comprehension. Why? Because regarding assumption, we need to know there is this level beyond which we can't assume. There's also this level till which we can assume. So there's always this thin line, that defining line till which we can assume, beyond which we can't assume. Let's look at these statements. Poor countries need to bring about change in their existing farming techniques. Need to. Need is an absolute word, but the keyword is assumption. So when we'll read the stretch of this passage, we can clearly say that this can be assumed even though the word need is used from this passage. Technology is of little use if it is not adapted. So it's about adopting and adapting. And it goes on to say extending to smallholders. And then the passage adds to it saying in such simple matters as how much fertilizer is to apply. So it's about a need to bring about some changes in existing farming techniques. One issue with this statement would be the use of poor countries. Now that's this gray area in comprehension. Poor country, the word uses poor country, but the passage is talking about developing countries, not poor countries. So that can be an issue. But when we look at the stretch of the passage, if you wouldn't mind assuming that, we can pick statement 1. As far as UPSC key is concerned, we are fine with that. As long as we are fine with UPSC key, we are okay with assuming that. So according to UPSC key, the answer is A. And let me tell you why this is wrong. Developed countries have better infrastructure and they waste less food. There's nothing mentioned about developed countries having better infrastructure and wasting less food. That's totally out of context. That's beyond the scope of the passage. Of course, the focus is on how things are in developing countries. And this mentioned here, better roads, storage facilities to allow for carriage of surplus to markets and reduce wastage. That's actually a cherished goal, a desire that is the author would want to see with some changes in the existing system. There's nothing mentioned about how things are in the developing countries. So that is not mentioned here as such. So that can be assumed from this passage. So that's that level beyond which you can't assume. And statement 1 is that level till which you can assume. Question 23. You may pause and read this passage. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. The key word is assumption. After reading these statements, I'm sure statement 2 is an easy elimination. Why? Corporate farming is a viable option for food security in poor countries. There's nothing mentioned in this passage regarding corporate farming. Even if you have to assume, there should be something that you can feel is mentioned here. There's nothing regarding corporate farming. So this is an easy elimination, and so is option C. B, C are discarded. Now looking at the crux of this passage and look at the keyword assumption, UPSC said, and I believe UPSC is right in telling that Statement 1 can be assumed. Growing enough food for future generations will be a challenge. Though the word will is here, we can assume that growing food for future generations will be a challenge. That can be assumed from this passage. Towards the beginning of the passage, we can read, in some places in the world, the productivity of staples such as rice and wheat has reached a plateau. Neither has raising the yields, and they've given some places will be unsuitable for farming. So that's something that we can assume from this passage, even though the word will is used. And my option would be, as UPSC said, option A. Please read this passage to answer question 31, 32, and 33. 3 sub-questions, single passage. Question 31. According to the passage, natural selection cannot anticipate future environments on the earth as they've given us 4 statements. These 4 statements and this passage in its entirety may look complicated, but it's certainly one of the easiest questions from this CSAT 2002 question paper. When we'll work on the principle of elimination, it's so easy. Now, reading all these statements, I'm stuck with statement 2 because there's a serious issue in statement 2 where they have said all the existing species would get extinct as their genomes will not withstand biological mishaps. All the existing species. There's a serious issue with this word all, which is extreme. The passage clearly mentions an outcome of this is the extinction of those species which cannot overcome environmental adversity. It's very specific on certain species, classifying them, calling them as those species which cannot overcome environmental adversity. It's not all the existing species that would go extinct. It's never that. And there's 90% of species extinct, at least 10% are left. So no way this passage is giving us this idea that all the extinct species would get extinct. This passage or the author is actually trying to say that species that can withstand environmental adversity due to their genes will not go extinct. So this is an easy elimination. And when I'll eliminate statement 2, option A is eliminated, option B is eliminated, and so is option D. So my answer would be option C. And when I'll read statement 1, 3, and 4, I can clearly know that that attributes to the particular question based on this passage. Question 32. The passage suggests that Darwinian theory of evolution is not a theory at all because this question is very specific on why the passage would suggest that Darwinian theory of evolution is not a theory at all. So we need to go to that place where this is mentioned. To get your answer clearly and correctly, we need to go to that particular portion of the passage where this is mentioned. Now look at this. The Darwinian explanation for extinct life is once again simple, elegant, and at once convincing. Organisms go extinct as a function of environmental or biological assaults for which their inheritance deems them ill-equipped. Therefore, this therefore is very critical because this is connecting what is already said. Therefore, the so-called Darwinian theory of evolution is not a theory at all. It's very clear. We need to go to that place where that is mentioned and connect from what is mentioned to that. Therefore, then we'll get the answer as extinction is a function of environment and biological assaults. Many of the popular keys in India before the UPSC official key went with option C, which is wrong. So there's a very good chance that this mistake can come. This is mentioned. There are no evidences to refute it. That's for sure. It is mentioned at this portion of the passage. But that is not why the passage would suggest that Darwinian theory of evolution is not a theory at all. If you go to that place, we'll get the right answer. Okay, let's attempt question 33. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. Remember the keyword assumption. There's a limit beyond which you can't assume. There's a limit till which you can assume. Statement 1. Only species that have the ability to overcome environmental catastrophes will survive and perpetuate. I may have issues with 2 words here, only and will, but since I've read this passage and the keyword is assumption, I don't have much issue with these words. And clearly, that can be assumed from the passage as we can read. An outcome of this is the extinction of those species which cannot overcome environmental adversity. This can be assumed from this passage. Statement 2. More than 90% of species on the earth are in danger of getting extinct due to drastic changes in environment. This 90% may come from this 90%, but these two 90%, they are set in different contexts. Now, this is in past, but this is talking about future. The passage talks about past. The earth may presently have up to 10 million species, yet more than 90% species that have ever lived on the earth are now extinct. That's past, something that's happened in the past. But this statement is talking about something that will happen in future. We can't assume that from this passage. So this cannot be taken. Statement 3, Darwin's theory explains all the natural phenomena, everything in this world. Now that's too extreme. And on top of that, the passage talks about natural laws, and this to confuse us, and the statement talks about natural phenomena. Never in this world, the word law and phenomena has been the same. They are different in its own sense. So that is just to confuse you. My answer would be A. I hope this is clear. Let's attempt question 34. Read this passage. Which one of the following statements best reflects the crux of the passage? Crux of the passage is like asking you what is the central theme, what is the main idea, what is the topic sentence. Let's look at the options. Option A, people should be persuaded to continue with the mainly Indian traditional cereal-based diets. Should be persuaded. That's not mentioned here. This passage doesn't make any suggestion of that sort to change people's dietary patterns. That's not mentioned. That is not the crux of the passage. Option B, India needs to focus on developing agricultural productivity and capacity for more energy generation in the coming years. Now, that's a good sentence to read, a feel-good sentence to read, a good suggestion, but not anyway mentioned in this passage, and definitely not the crux of the passage. Option C, modern technological developments result in the change of cultural and social behavior of the people. Seriously, a sentence, but nowhere related to this passage. It will never be the crux of this passage for sure. Option C, that's totally outside the context. Cultural, social behavior, it's never mentioned in this passage. Maybe talked about somewhere else by someone, but not by the author in this passage. Option D, water management practices in India need to change dramatically in the coming years. Need to change. I may have an issue with this word need, but I'll not have the issue with need when I read this portion of the passage again. Increasing use of electronic and electrical machine gadgets and motor vehicles needs more and more energy, and generation of energy needs water. And this passage is all about that. There's nothing other than that which can be taken as the crux of the passage, at least from the options given to us. This word dramatically may look a bit dramatic, but it's okay as long as I can eliminate all these options. And as long as UPSC is okay with that, option D is my right answer. And UPSC is okay with this. Question 41. The passage is based on the idea that option A, man should not work hard. Man should not work hard. No way. That's not the idea here. Easy elimination. The great evil of our age is overstrain. Yes, there's something mentioned about overstrain. Option C, man cannot think well. Now, don't think too much. That's not mentioned here, that man cannot think well. That's an easy elimination. Option D, man cannot care for his spiritual welfare. Now, that's somewhat mentioned somewhere here. Let me go through the options again, and let me read that again to reaffirm. Because UPSC said option B is the right answer. Now, let's try to think why UPSC said option B is the right answer, and why not D? It's a clear case of cause and effect in this passage. Now, the initial portion of the passage is talking about a cause, and then about a few of its effects. And option D, man cannot care for spiritual welfare, is just an effect of the grand cause that is mentioned here. The primary focus of this passage is on the cause. For 2 or 3 generations past, the passage is telling that an excessive amount of labor is ruled today in every circle of society, with the result that the man's spiritual element cannot thrive. He finds it very difficult to spend his little leisure in serious activities. He does not want to think. Now, this passage is primarily about the cause. And of course, there's a mention of the effects. But the passage is based on the cause and not just about the effect. The focus is on the cause. That's why option B is the right answer. And option D can be eliminated because option B is the right answer. Question 42. Man does not seek self-improvement because. Now we have to go to that place where it is mentioned. And self-improvement is mentioned here. It's a very easy question. An easy pick. Is not intellectually capable is outside the scope of the passage. We have to go to that place where that is mentioned very clearly. Let me make it very clear. Has no time to do so. It's not about having no time to do so. Of course, there is overstrain, there is lack of time, but there is leisure time, which is not really taken care the way it should be taken care. That's what I can understand by reading this passage. It's not about having no time. When you focus on man does not seek self-improvement because the very specific question is distracted by materialism, well, that is outside the scope of the passage. Option D, loves amusement and is mentally idle. Yes, very clearly that is mentioned here. He does not want to think, or he cannot, even if he wants to. He seeks no self-improvement, but entertainment which would enable him to be mentally idle and to forget his own usual activities. Therefore, the so-called culture of our age depend on more. And these are tools used by the author to exemplify what the author would want to substantiate regarding self-improvement. So option D is my answer. Read this passage to answer question 43 and 44. Question 44 will follow after this passage. Question 43. Which of the following would invariably happen in a country when the demographic dividend has begun to operate? This question is very specific on what would happen invariably in a country when the demographic dividend has begun to operate. Statement 1. The number of illiterate people will decrease. Seriously. Is that so? Is it the way it works? No way. That the number of illiterate people will decrease just when the demographic dividend has begun to operate. Maybe the other way around is okay, where literacy will increase, the quality of demographic dividend will increase. That's fine. When literacy is increasing, the quality will increase. That's okay. But we can't take it that the number of illiterate people will decrease just when demographic dividend will begin to operate. That's too much. It requires government interventions, the interventions from stakeholders, schemes, programs, etc., to make sure that literacy will be on the rise, not just when you switch on the demographic dividend. So statement 1 is an easy elimination. And when statement 1 is eliminated, looking at the options, I can easily eliminate option A, I can easily eliminate option C, I can easily eliminate option D. And option B is my answer. But let me throw some light on the other statements as well. Statement 2 is an easy pick from this passage. It's directly mentioned in this passage, statement 2. The ratio of very old and very young will decrease for a while. As we can clearly read from this side, the demographic dividend is basically a swelling in the working age population, which conversely means that the relative ratio of very young and very old will for a while be on the decline. Word by word is mentioned in the passage. So that's a sure shot to pick. Statement 3 can't be taken because this passage never mentions about population growth as such. And population growth rate will quickly stabilize. That's never mentioned here. Of course, this passage is talking about some benefits. Some benefits. The benefits of demographic dividend depend on the quality of working age population. So those things are mentioned here. And working age population is mentioned, but that doesn't mean that the passage is talking about population growth. So this is totally outside context. So 3 is not taken for the right reasons. And our answer is option B. Let's move on to question number 44. Okay, question 44. With reference to the passage, which of the following inferences can be drawn? The key word here is inference. Unlike the keyword assumption, which means what you can imply from the passage, what you may imply from the passage, that's assumption. The keyword inference would mean what you will conclude from the passage. So when I talked about assumption, I said what you may or you can imply from the passage. And when I'm talking about the keyword inference, I'm saying what you will conclude from the passage. And since the keyword is inference, I cannot conclude or infer statement 1 for sure because of this word essential. Demographic dividend is an essential condition for a country to rapidly increase its economic growth rate. I can't infer that. Maybe it's very difficult, but I can or I may assume that, but I can't conclude or infer that. I'll have to infer that, but I can't do that. Demographic dividend is an essential condition. The passage never mentions that. Essential condition. Of course, the passage tells us the demographic dividend is a great window of opportunity, but not something like an essential, inevitable, indispensable condition for a country to rapidly increase its economic growth. And the passage continued saying that the demographic dividend tends to raise a nation's saving rate. Tends to. Look at these words. And since the savings rate is an important driver for growth, now that's the connect, this should help elevate our economic growth. They should help. That's it. That's it. Tends to help. Window of opportunity. There's nothing like it is essential condition for a country to rapidly increase economic growth. So it's a clear elimination, and especially when the keyword is inference. Statement 2, another elimination. Promotion of higher education is an essential condition for a country for rapid economic growth. Essential condition, that's never mentioned. I can't infer that from this passage. And it's nothing about promotion of higher education. And this passage talks about education, not higher education in this sense. And this implies bringing back the importance of education. That's it. Bringing back the importance of education, acquisition of skills and human capital. Nowhere in this passage it is mentioned, or something like you can infer that promotion of higher education is an essential condition. That's too extreme. That's beyond the scope of the passage. And my answer would be option D. Neither one. Okay, let's attempt question 51. Question 51. Which of the following statements best reflects the underlying tone of the passage? Tone of the passage is somewhat similar to attitude of the author. Let's look at the options. Option A. Only an educated population can best make use of the benefits of economic progress. I have an issue with this extreme word only. I have an issue with this superlative best. Apart from having issues with these two words, I have no other issue in taking option A as my right answer, the tone of the passage of this particular passage. Because after reading this passage, I feel this passage is tuned in such a way that option A can be the tone of the passage, though there are these extreme words out here. Let me be a bit cautious. Let me read further. Let me check option B. All economic development should be aimed at the creation of leisure. All economic development, now that's too extreme. Should is another extreme word. And on top of having these two extreme words, it doesn't make the tone of the passage for sure. It would be an exaggeration to infer that all economic development should lead to creation of leisure. And on top of all this, the author has cautioned that too much of leisure can be tedious, and has indeed recommended that education is inevitable for the best use of leisure time. And option B is certainly not the tone of the passage. Option C, an increase in the educated population of a country leads to an increase in the happiness of its people. Now that sounds good. That may be assumed, but not the tone of this passage. There is a reverse logic to it. If a leisured population has to be happy, it must be educated population. That's what the passage is saying. Now, this statement is confined to leisured population, not population in general. So we cannot say from this passage that an increase in educated population leads to an increase in happiness among people. Not from this passage. May look like a good option, but not an option to pick as a tone of this passage. Option D, use of machines should be encouraged in order to create a large leisured population. Now, this D is totally against the spirit of the passage. It's totally contrary to what the author is trying to say. The passage implies that there is a leisured population due to mechanization of economy. And the author discusses how to best channelize this leisured population. So option D can never be the tone of this passage. It's totally contrary to the passage. So I land up with my initial intuition Then option A is the right answer. Question 52. I hope you would have read this. With reference to the passage, which one of the following statements is correct? Option A. It is not possible for adults to feel thrilled by presents. Option A is telling us it is impossible for adults to feel thrilled by presents. But is the passage telling that? I'll say no. The author, rather the passage, only speaks about certain traits of adults to be lesser thrilled and excited by happy events. That's it. Giving and receiving presents is mentioned in this passage as a mere tool to exemplify that assertion. The passage never makes any assertion that adults cannot be thrilled by presents at all. In fact, this is a lovely passage. If you can read it from here, it's like the passage is giving a suggestion that adults could be happy like children too, provided they are lesser cautious, anxious, and skeptical about things. So this is not my option. Option B. There can be more than one reason why adults feel less thrilled by presents. Now, this sounds like my answer because I've read many reasons, but let me confirm. Let me read option C and D. The author does not know why adults feel less thrilled by presents. The author does not know that, seriously? Then what is the author talking about? The stretch of this passage? Author certainly knows. And author is giving out many reasons as tools to really substantiate what the author wants to say. So don't say author does not know. Author will feel really bad. Author knows. Option D, adults have less capacity to feel the joy of loving or being loved. Now, option D is typed for the sake of typing a fourth option. So we can't blame the person who typed option D because there should be 4 options. That's an easy elimination. And we have an easy selection here because A, C, and D are eliminated, and that is option B. Yes, there can be more than one reason why adults feel less thrilled by presents. You can read many reasons in this passage. If presents bring less thrill now that we are grown up, perhaps it is because we have too much already, or perhaps it is because we have lost the fullness of joy and giving. Then perhaps we are too cautious, too anxious, too skeptical. They are all reasons. So B is my answer. Okay, let's try question 53. This is a sub-question of the previous passage. Bit tricky. Let's see. The author of the passage is against. This question is very much specific on what the author of the passage is against. Option A, worrying too much about the past and future. Well, that could be my answer. But let me focus on elimination now rather than selecting the right answer. So focus, elimination. Let me read option B. Author of the passage is against being in the habit of thinking about presents. Now, why would the author of the passage be against that? If someone is in the habit of thinking about presents, what would worry the author? Nothing. So this is not my answer. Option C, not being thrilled by new things. The author of the passage is against not being thrilled by new things. If you're not thrilled by new things, totally out of context. If you're not thrilled by new things, that is not author's headache. And why would author be against that? Someone being thrilled by new things. That is not the crux of the passage, totally out of the context. Option D, if you can read this, the author of the passage is against giving and receiving joy only partially. Now that may look like the answer, but there is a very serious trap here. Joy of giving, joy of receiving. That is what the passage is telling. If you can read that, perhaps it is because we have lost the fullness of the joy of giving, and with it, the fullness of joy of receiving. Joy of giving, joy of receiving. But what is the option telling? Giving and receiving joy. Are they the same? Never. Joy of giving, joy of receiving is actually something that you will get with that action. And giving and receiving joy, you're giving and receiving joy. So it's entirely different. That's a very serious trap. And this is not my answer. B, C, D, they are not my answer. Author of the passage is against worrying too much about the past and future. Now that is the answer. Not because I have eliminated B, C, and D, but it is clearly mentioned in the passage. The author is against, if not directly mentioned that I'm against this, but this is something that we can imply from this passage. Children's fears are poignant, their miseries are acute, but they do not look too forward. This is my answer, option A. Let me make it clear. They do not look too forward nor too far backward. Their joys are clear and complete. It's about the innocence of children, not worrying too much about past and future that will give them joys which is clear and complete, unlike adults who are cautious, too anxious, too skeptical, think too much. That's why the passage mentions, if we thought less about all this, happiness will come our way. So you think too much about the past and the future, you become more conscious, anxious, and you lose all the joy, which will not be complete. So option A is my answer. I hope that's clear. Okay, let's try this passage to attempt question 61 and 62. Which one of the following is implied by the passage? The keyword here is implied. Remember, implication would mean what you may assume from the passage. Whatever it is, it has to be from the passage. Option A. Most of the people do not accumulate money for their needs. This passage is clearly classified a group of people, calling them the majority of people who fail to accumulate money sufficient for their needs. That's fine. Till that much is correct regarding option A. But this passage isn't just about a group of people not being able to accumulate money for their needs. The passage is clearly focusing on why they are not able to accumulate money for their needs. There's a reason to it. And that is clearly mentioned here. The majority of people who fail to accumulate money sufficient for their needs are generally easily influenced by the opinion of others. This passage is all about subject-object relationships. Subject is going to have a lot of opinions for the object, and object is going to be easily influenced by the subject. And that is the issue the passage would want to address here. So this certainly is not my implication from this passage. Most of the people never fail to accumulate money for their needs. Option B is not my answer. This passage is not about people who are not able to accumulate money for their needs. It's beyond all that. Option C, there are people who fail to accumulate money for their needs. Of course, it's something that is mentioned here. The majority of people who fail to accumulate money for their needs, that is mentioned here. Option C, no doubt about that. Option D, there is no need to accumulate money. This passage is never telling anyone to go to some dense forest or climb up hills, live a solitary life without any money. So this is totally out of context. Option D is not the implication from this passage. Now, option C is the right answer. Now, why would I pick option C and not A? Most of the people do not accumulate money for their needs. That is mentioned here. And there are people who fail to accumulate money for their needs. It may sound similar, but the passage would want to address some reasons why people fail to accumulate money, rather than people not accumulating money. Option C is more about the assertion the author is giving regarding the subject-object relationship, the reason why people fail to accumulate. So option C is a better option than option A, and that is why that is the implication from this passage. I hope that's clear. Okay, question 62. What is the main idea of the passage? Main idea, central theme of the passage. Option A, people should not be influenced by the opinion of others. Should. This should is an extreme word. I'm a bit cautious, but let me read further. Option B, people should accumulate as much money as they can. Should, another extreme word here. And this passage is not about inviting us to accumulate as much money as we can. This passage is never telling us to loot a bank or be involved in any atrocities to amass wealth. So this is totally out of context. Option C, people should neither give nor accept opinions. Now, this option is given for the sake of giving one option. That's it. Because this passage is not about people whether giving opinion or not. This passage is not about opinion. It's about being influenced by opinion while taking decisions. So C is not my option. Option D, people will succeed for sure. Yes, in any undertaking, any extreme, if they do not accept opinion at all. Extreme. This passage is not blaming opinions. This passage is about being influenced by opinion by anyone, and you be influenced by that. That will actually hamper your decision making. So people will succeed in any undertaking if they do not accept any opinion at all. Is just typed here because an option has to be typed. Easy eliminations, option B, C, D, and option E is in A is my easy selection, though the word should is there. But I'm not harmed with the word should because at the stretch of this passage, I can clearly know that option A is my right answer. Influenced. The word is used again and again, are generally easily influenced by the opinion of others and everyone has a flock of opinions ready to be wished upon by someone who will accept them. If you are influenced by opinions when you reach decisions, you will not succeed in any undertaking. The passage is said you will not succeed, then there's no harm in taking this should. So option A should be my answer. Okay, let's try this passage. The smallest passage from this question paper, certainly the trickiest one. That's what I feel. Question 63. With reference to the above passage, which of the following statements are correct? Statement 1. Conventions are the sources of rights of man. In normal case, we would have easily eliminated this statement as something that is universal, something that is extreme, but not from this passage. Let's read this passage again. The social order, the article the is making this universal. The social order is a sacred right. The social order is a sacred right. Again, article A is used here, which is the basis of all other rights. The basis of all other rights. The social order is a sacred right, and which is the basis of all other rights. Social order is the basis of all other rights. That's what the passage is telling. And this social order is a sacred right. Nevertheless, this right, social order, which is a sacred right, which is the basis of all other rights, that will fill this right does not come from nature and must therefore be founded on conventions. Must be founded on conventions. Extremely mentioned here, must be founded on conventions. So from this, we can take conventions are the sources of rights of man, because all other rights, social order is the basis. And this social order must be founded on conventions, which would mean conventions are sources of rights of man. No harm in taking this. Statement 2, rights of man can be exercised only when there is a social order. Now, only these are extreme words. In usual case, again, that's an easy elimination. But looking at this passage, which says the social order is a sacred right, which is the basis of all other rights. This right does not come from nature and must therefore be found on conventions. Now, this passage in itself is very extreme on whatever it is saying. So, UPSC is rightly telling us option C is the right answer. Statement 2 is correct from this passage. Only is not an issue because it's very extremely mentioned. The social order is a sacred right, which is the basis of all other rights. And it must be found on conventions. I hope that's clear. Read this passage to answer questions 71 and 72. It's an interesting passage. The author's assumption about scientific research is that this question is specific on author's assumption about what? About scientific research. Is that it is never very valuable. Option A. Did the author say that it's never very valuable? The author has never said that and never pick option A. In fact, this is totally against what the author is trying to say. Author will feel bad, author will feel sad, and UPSC will give you negative mark if you go for option A. Option B, it is sometimes very valuable. Did the author assume that scientific research is sometimes very valuable? No, there is much more than that. The author is not telling us it is at times very valuable. Beyond that, the author has got something to say. As we could read this passage, and when I got to option C, I could feel that option C is my right answer. It is never without some value. Though an extreme word never is used here, never without some value. That could be my answer, but let me read option D. It is always very valuable. Now, did the author say it is always very valuable? So extreme? The author never said that. Now, option C is my right answer, and rightly so. If I can read this, I can clearly see the essence of option C from this passage. Scientific research is probably never completely valueless. It is never without some value. This is my option. However silly and insignificant it may seem, however mechanical and unintelligent the labors of the researchers, there is always a chance. There's always a chance, not that it is always, there is always a chance that the results may be of value to the investigator of talent. And the author is continuing to say, based off some fruitful generalization. So it's never without some value is the assumption the author is making regarding scientific research. So option C is my answer. Question 72. According to the author, they have given us 4 options. Let me begin with eliminating the wrong answer. Option D is an easy elimination for me. Why? A research result must always be of some value to an intelligent investigator. This passage or author is not making any direct or indirect assertion that a research result must always be of some value to an intelligent investigator or anyone. This passage is not making any assertion of that sort. Option A is also an elimination for me. Why? Not many research results can be of value to an intelligent investigator. Though this passage towards the end is mentioning about certain research which is not original, not scientific, but this passage is primarily focusing on how research results can be of some value. This passage is being positive and not negative. It will be negative to point out that not many research results can be of value to an intelligent investigator, but it will be positive to point out what the author is really trying to point out. And that is not option A in any case. Option B and option C, they are fighting so close. And let's pick the right answer from B and C. Option B, a research result is always valuable to an intelligent investigator. I have a problem with this extreme word, always. This passage is not telling us a research result is always valuable. Though the word always is used, but we know that there is always a chance that the results may be of some value. So option C, reading this, since I've eliminated option D and B, option C, reading this, any research result can be of value to an intelligent investigator is my answer. And this can be is a helping word here. Though any is an extreme word, can be is a helping word here. So I'm primarily focusing on this portion of the passage, which really guides me to option C. Again, any is an extreme word, but can be of some value is something that is helping me to reaffirm option C is my right answer. I hope this is clear. And finally, we are at the last comprehension question from set A of CSAT 2022 question paper. Question 73, please read this. Question 73. Which one of the following best reflects the practical, rational, and lasting solution? Solution to a problem that is addressed in this passage. And this is the problem that is addressed in this passage. The skewed water availability that has to be managed and regulated for its consumption throughout the year in a sustainable manner. Let's look at the options. Option A. Constructing huge concrete storage tanks and canals across the country. Is that a practical, rational solution? I'll say no. What about the socio-economic, environmental problems associated with that? So this is not the practical solution. Option B, changing the cropping patterns and farming practices. That is not the lasting solution, practical solution. Now we need a lasting solution. We need this water to be managed and regulated for its consumption throughout the year. So this is not a practical solution for sure. Option C, interlinking of rivers across the country. Now that looks like a good topic for your GS answer. You may write all the pros and cons, all the socio-economic, political, environmental issues involved. But that will be a good answer, but not a practical solution or a lasting solution to the problem this passage demands. So that's not our answer. Option D, buffer stocking of water through dams and recharging aquifers looks like my practical, rational, and lasting solution. Why? Because buffer stocking of water through dams and recharging aquifers would mean that the excess water is being stored and retained in a practical, sustainable, efficient, and cost-effective manner. And these recharged aquifers would almost ensure that groundwater is available all throughout the year. And we need this to be available in a sustainable manner. So option D is my answer. I hope this is clear. Thank you so much.